Maggie had always prided herself on being the perfect wife and mother. At 45, she felt like she had perfected the art of balance, keeping the home running smoothly, managing her career, and of course, nurturing her marriage with David. They had been married for 20 years, and for most of that time, she believed their connection was as solid as the oak tree in their backyard. It had weathered the storms of raising children, managing finances, and coping with the everyday stress that came with life. But recently, something had shifted. David, her once attentive and affectionate husband, had become distant. It started slowly, like the quiet fade of twilight. At first, it was just a few more hours spent at the office, then late nights spent in front of his computer, as if his work had spilled into their home. Maggie thought nothing of it at first. She was no stranger to the demands of adulthood. After all, she had her own career, and she understood that life often demanded sacrifices. However, as weeks turned into months, David's detachment became harder to ignore. The conversations they once shared before bed had dwindled to brief, perfunctory exchanges. Gone were the days of weekend hikes and spontaneous outings. Instead, Maggie spent her weekends attending to the house and kids, while David buried himself in his work, or so she thought. One evening, she walked by the study and noticed David sitting in front of his computer screen, laughing softly to himself. It was an odd, almost childlike laugh, something she hadn't heard in ages. She stood in the doorway, watching him for a moment. His eyes were fixed on the screen, his face illuminated by the glow of the computer. "Maggie, I didn't hear you come in," David said, startled. His voice lacked its usual warmth. She frowned, sensing that something was wrong. "What's going on, David? What's so funny?" "Nothing," he replied quickly, closing the laptop a bit too hastily. "Just work stuff." Maggie wasn't convinced. The way he had closed the laptop too fast, the strange nervousness in his voice, it didn't feel like just work stuff. It felt like something else, something he was hiding from her. That night, as Maggie lay awake in bed, her mind wouldn't stop racing. She replayed the moment over and over in her head. What was going on with David? Why was he acting so different? The next few days passed in a blur. Maggie's unease grew, gnawing at her every time she saw David retreat into his computer or his phone. He had started spending more time online, laughing at things she couldn't see, lost in conversations she wasn't part of. Maggie finally decided she couldn't wait any longer. One evening, when David was sitting at his desk, she gathered the courage to confront him. She stood in the doorway, her voice steady but filled with a quiet fury. "David, what is going on? What are you hiding from me?" David's face paled as he slowly turned away from the screen. "Maggie, it's nothing, just some work." But Maggie had seen enough. She could feel the distance in his eyes. She could feel the truth bubbling to the surface, and she knew this moment would change everything. "Don't lie to me," Maggie said, her voice trembling. "I know something's going on, David. You're hiding something, and I need to know what it is." David hesitated, his eyes flicking toward the screen. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but nothing came out. Maggie felt her pulse quicken. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides. After what felt like an eternity, David spoke, his voice low. "I've been talking to someone online. I didn't think it would mean anything." Maggie's breath caught in her throat. The words echoed in her mind. "Talking to someone online? Who is it?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. It's just someone I met in a chat room. We've been talking for a while, but I never meant for it to go this far." "It's not real, Maggie. It's just online." Maggie's head spun. "How long has this been going on?" she asked, feeling a cold weight settle in her stomach. David looked away, his gaze shifting uncomfortably. "A few months." Maggie stepped back, her heart racing. The man she had built her life with, the father of her children, was emotionally involved with someone online? She had suspected something, but hearing the truth was a blow she never saw coming. She had always thought their marriage was a safe space, one that had withstood so many challenges. But this felt like betrayal in its most modern form. Tears stung her eyes, but she blinked them away. She refused to let him see her cry. "Not yet." David was watching her, waiting for a reaction, but Maggie didn't know how to react. Anger, sadness, confusion, they all swirled inside her, making it impossible to settle on one emotion. Instead, She simply turned and walked away. She didn't want to hear more. She didn't want to know the details. She just wanted to escape the suffocating weight of the truth. Maggie couldn't sleep that night. She lay awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling, her thoughts racing. How had they gotten here? She had always known marriage required work, but she never imagined it would come to this. She had always thought they were strong enough to withstand anything, except maybe this. At dawn, Maggie got out of bed, her body aching with the exhaustion of not having slept, but she felt strangely numb. The house was silent as she made her way to the kitchen. Her mind wandered over everything she had just learned, the secrecy, the emotional distance, the online affair. She made coffee mechanically, her hands shaking slightly as she poured it. Her reflection in the kitchen window caught her eye. The woman staring back at her seemed unfamiliar, tired, and hurt. Maggie had spent so many years nurturing others that she had lost touch with the person she once was. Who was she, now that everything had been shattered? As the day unfolded, Maggie could only think about one thing: how would she move forward from here? What did this betrayal mean for their future? And more importantly, what did it mean for her future? The days after David's confession were a blur. Maggie moved through the motions of daily life like a ghost, numb and detached from the world around her. She went through the motions of feeding the kids, helping with homework, and managing the household, but every task felt like it was happening in slow motion. Her mind kept replaying the words David had uttered the night before: "I've been talking to someone online." She couldn't shake the cold, guttural feeling that washed over her when he admitted it. Someone online. Was it just a harmless connection, as he had claimed? Or had it grown into something more? The more she thought about it, the angrier she became. She had always trusted David, always believed in their connection. They'd shared so much, their dreams, their fears, their hopes for their children. How could he betray her with someone he'd never even met in person? And why hadn't he come to her when he started feeling disconnected? Why hadn't he told her he was unhappy? The truth was simple yet brutal. David hadn't just been talking to someone. He had been hiding a secret life from her. A life that, in his eyes, seemed to offer something she no longer could. That evening, after dinner, David came to her with a nervous look in his eyes. He was holding his phone tightly in his hands, as if it were a lifeline he was afraid to let go of. "Maggie, can we talk?" David's voice was softer than usual, filled with the vulnerability Maggie rarely heard in him. It stung. "Talk? About what?" Maggie asked, trying to keep the bitterness from creeping into her voice. "You've already told me everything, haven't you?" David shifted uncomfortably, rubbing the back of his neck. "Maggie, I know I've hurt you. And I can't fix what I've done, but I want to explain. I need you to understand. It wasn't what you think." Maggie's heart thundered in her chest. Was he going to tell her he was in love with this woman? Was this where they were headed? The idea of it felt like a punch to the gut. She had never imagined her life would be turned upside down in such a cold modern way, through a simple screen, by someone he had never even touched. David continued, his words spilling out in a rush, as though he needed to get everything off his chest. "It started out innocently. Kara, she's someone I met on an online game. We just started talking at first, sharing the same interest in games, and I didn't think it would go anywhere. But over time, she became someone I could talk to. Someone who listened. I felt, I don't know, alive when I was talking to her. She made me feel young again, like I mattered. I wasn't looking for an affair, Maggie. I swear I wasn't. It just happened." Maggie stared at him, her breath shallow. She wanted to scream, to tell him how foolish he was, to ask why he couldn't see that they could have worked through any issue together, face to face. But all she could do was stare, frozen. "So what? You've been talking to her for months?" she asked, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to remain composed. David nodded. "Yes. But it was nothing physical. It was just emotional. It gave me something I didn't even realize I was missing." "Something you didn't realize you were missing?" Maggie echoed, her voice breaking. "What about us, David? What about this marriage? This family? Have I not been enough? Am I not enough?" David's eyes filled with regret. "Maggie, please. You are enough. It's just, I've been feeling lost. Like I've been invisible to you. The kids are growing up, and you're busy with your work. I don't blame you for it. It's just, I felt like we've been drifting apart, and I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't know how to fix it." Maggie blinked back, the tears threatening to fall. She wasn't sure if she was crying from pain, from frustration, or from something deeper. The silence between them stretched long, thick with the weight of their unspoken words. After a long moment, Maggie finally spoke. "David, I don't know what to say. I don't know if I can forgive you. I feel like you've betrayed me in a way that I can't even comprehend. How could you hide something like this from me?" David's shoulders slumped. "I know I was wrong. I should have told you. I should have come to you first. But I didn't know how to. And now I'm afraid that I've lost you. I don't want to lose you, Maggie. I love you." Love. The word echoed in Maggie's ears, but it felt hollow now. How could love exist alongside such betrayal? How could it survive this? "I don't know if I can trust you anymore, David. I don't know if I even want to," Maggie said quietly. She could hear the finality in her own voice, but the truth was, she wasn't sure what she wanted. Could she live with this? Could she learn to forgive him, even if she never understood the why of it? David seemed to sense the shift in her. He stood there, looking lost, waiting for her to make the next move. Maggie closed her eyes for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "I need space. I need to think," she finally said, her voice small but firm. "I need to figure out what's next. For me. For us." David opened his mouth to protest, but Maggie held up her hand, stopping him. "I don't know how we move forward, David. I don't know if we even can." She left the room without another word, retreating to the sanctuary of their bedroom. Closing the door behind her, she sank onto the edge of their bed. Her body felt heavy, as if the weight of the world had settled on her shoulders. She didn't know what to do. She didn't know what came next. But she did know one thing: she wasn't the same woman who had woken up that morning. She was someone different now, someone marked by this betrayal. And no matter what happened next, she had to figure out who she was in this new, fractured reality. Maggie had always believed that love was something you could rebuild. After all, wasn't that what they had done for 20 years? When they first met, their connection had been so strong, so effortless. David had been her partner in every sense. They had shared dreams, struggles, and victories together. Their marriage was built on a foundation of mutual respect and a deep emotional bond. At least, that's what Maggie thought. But now, after David's confession, she wasn't sure what their foundation had been made of. She wasn't sure if it was strong enough to withstand this new weight, this rupture that had cracked it all open. The weeks following David's admission were a blur of tension and silence. At first, Maggie had hoped that things would naturally return to normal. She had hoped that the therapy they started would smooth over the jagged edges of their relationship. But hope wasn't enough. Every conversation felt forced, and every attempt to re-establish the closeness they once shared seemed to push them further apart. The chasm between them grew wider with every passing day. David had been doing everything in his power to prove his commitment. He had given her his phone, opened up about the conversations he had with Kara, and even stopped all online interactions. He claimed he wanted to work on their marriage, but Maggie wasn't sure if she believed him. She wasn't sure if she even wanted to. One evening, after the kids had gone to bed, Maggie found herself sitting in the living room, staring at the stack of marriage books David had bought them during the past month. Each book had a picture of a happy couple on the cover, and the titles all promised things like Rebuilding Your Relationship and Finding Your Way Back to Love. Maggie couldn't bring herself to open a single one of them. How could a book fix what felt irreparably broken? David sat across from her on the couch, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "Maggie," he began, his voice low. "I know things haven't been easy. I don't know how to make this right, but I'm trying. I'm here. I'm trying to show you that I want this to work." Maggie didn't answer immediately. She didn't want to lash out at him, but the words were ready to spill out, words she hadn't said yet, words that had been simmering beneath the surface. "Trying isn't enough, David. You say you're trying, but you've been trying to fix things for months now. We've been going in circles, and I don't know how to get out of it. I don't know how to get back to what we had before all of this." David looked away, clearly struggling with her words. Maggie could see the pain in his eyes, but it didn't make her feel any better. The guilt and regret he carried were heavy, but they weren't enough to erase the hurt she felt. The truth was that no matter how much David tried to rebuild, Maggie wasn't sure she could trust him again. She didn't know if she could trust herself either. "I know I've made mistakes," David said quietly, his voice cracking with emotion. "I never meant to hurt you. I love you, Maggie. I lost myself for a while. I don't want to lose you." Maggie's chest tightened. "It's not just about losing me, David. It's about losing us. We've lost something. Something deep. And I don't know how to get it back." There was a long silence, the kind that always felt louder than words. Maggie could hear the ticking of the clock in the hallway, marking each second of time that slipped away, and for the first time in a long while, she wasn't sure where to go from here. She couldn't keep living in limbo, neither moving forward nor going back. But what did moving forward look like? What did their future hold if she couldn't trust the man sitting across from her, the man who had once been her everything? David took a deep breath and looked at her with a mix of desperation and hope. "What do you need from me, Maggie? What can I do to show you that I'm committed to making this right?" Maggie met his gaze, and for the first time in weeks, she didn't look away. She felt the weight of her own silence, the internal struggle that had been consuming her. Could she forgive him? Could she rebuild what they once had? "I don't know, David. I need time. I need to figure out who I am in this marriage. I need to find my own footing again," she said, her voice soft but firm. David nodded, though his face reflected the pain of hearing her words. "I'll give you time. But I need you to know that I'm not going anywhere. I'm committed to you, Maggie. I'll do whatever it takes." Maggie's heart ached as she watched him. She knew how much he wanted this, how much he wanted to fix things. But it wasn't that simple. She wasn't sure if she could return to the woman she had been before all this, the woman who had trusted him with her heart, her life, her family. "I know you're trying, David. But trying isn't enough. I need to see you be different. I need to see that you've truly changed. Not just for me, but for yourself." David's eyes softened as he reached for her hand. "I will. I promise." As Maggie looked down at their hands, intertwined on the couch, a small part of her believed him. But another part, the part that had been hurt and betrayed, wasn't sure if belief was enough. She had spent too long giving him the benefit of the doubt, believing his promises, and each time, she had been let down. Could she keep trusting him? Could they really rebuild? Or was she fooling herself into thinking that time could heal this wound? For the first time, Maggie wasn't sure. The days seemed to stretch on, as though time itself was holding its breath, waiting to see which direction Maggie and David would take. Their marriage was a delicate web, and every word, every gesture, felt like it could either strengthen or unravel it completely. David had stopped all communication with Kara, or so he claimed. Maggie wanted to believe him, but trust was something that couldn't simply be handed back like a misplaced item. It had to be earned, and right now, she wasn't sure David had done enough to earn it. Though they had begun marriage counseling, the emotional scars left by his online relationship ran deeper than either of them had anticipated. What troubled Maggie most wasn't just David's actions, but the realization of what they had both lost in the process. In their marriage, they had once shared everything, the mundane and the extraordinary. But somewhere along the way, they had both neglected the foundation they had built, until it was fragile enough to crumble. As part of their therapy, they had agreed to spend more quality time together. Maggie had hoped that these efforts would help them reconnect, but she couldn't shake the feeling that David was still hiding something. She would catch him spending hours on his phone, glued to the screen, a faraway look in his eyes. He wasn't talking to Kara anymore, but Maggie wondered if there was something else, something she couldn't yet see. One Friday evening, after a particularly grueling week of therapy and endless conversations, Maggie decided to confront him again. They were sitting on the couch in the living room, the house quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. The kids were at a sleepover, and for the first time in weeks, they were alone. "Maggie, what's wrong?" David asked, his eyes filled with concern as he noticed her staring at him, her expression distant. "I've been thinking a lot, David. About everything," Maggie said, choosing her words carefully. "I can't stop wondering if you're really here, with me, with us, or if you're still somewhere else." David shifted uncomfortably, looking down at his phone. "What do you mean?" "I'm here, Maggie. I'm doing everything I can to make this work." Maggie took a deep breath. "You've been doing everything, yes. But you're still on your phone all the time. I don't feel like I'm the one you're truly paying attention to. You keep retreating into that world." David paused, his fingers hovering over the phone. He looked at her, a mixture of guilt and frustration in his eyes. "I told you, I'm not talking to Kara anymore. It's over." "I know that," Maggie replied, her voice quiet but firm. "But I'm not talking about her. I'm talking about the way you're hiding in this digital world. It's like you're addicted to it. And I don't know if I can compete with it." David's eyes widened. "Maggie, I'm not addicted to anything. I'm just trying to find something that makes me feel connected, something that makes me feel like I'm not invisible." "Invisible?" Maggie echoed. She couldn't understand it. All these years, all these sacrifices, and yet David had felt invisible in their marriage. She couldn't fathom why he hadn't come to her sooner, why he hadn't shared these feelings with her before it had gotten this far. "David, do you know how much I've been here for you? I've been here through everything, the late nights, the stress of raising the kids, the pressures of life. I've been with you every step of the way. And you've felt invisible." Her voice wavered. "I don't know how to fix that. I don't know how to make you feel like you matter when you don't see me too." David opened his mouth to respond but closed it again, clearly wrestling with his own emotions. He ran his hand through his hair, frustration creeping across his face. "I don't know what happened, Maggie. One day I was fine, and the next I felt like I was losing myself. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I didn't want to hurt you. I didn't want to feel like this." Maggie could see the pain in his eyes, but it didn't erase the hurt she felt. She couldn't just forget about the months of silence, the absence of intimacy, the slow, steady erosion of their connection. All the time she had tried to reach him and had come up empty. She couldn't forget how she had felt in those moments, like a stranger in her own marriage. "You say you didn't mean for any of this to happen," Maggie said softly, her voice laced with sorrow. "But it did. And now we have to deal with it. I need you to understand that it's not just about you anymore. It's about us. It's about whether we can rebuild this marriage, or if it's beyond repair." David nodded, his eyes downcast. I know I've hurt you, and I'm trying to make it right. I'm doing everything I can to make things better." Maggie stood up, the weight of everything pressing down on her. "David, I don't think you understand. It's not about what you're doing for me. It's about what you're doing to me. I need you to be present. I need you to be here. Not just physically, but emotionally. If you can't do that, then I don't know how we can move forward." She walked away, leaving David sitting alone on the couch, his face filled with regret. As she retreated into their bedroom, Maggie closed the door behind her, her heart aching with the weight of what she had just said. She knew it wasn't just about David's digital distractions, it was about the emotional distance that had been growing between them for years. He had retreated into a world that wasn't real, while she had stayed grounded in the reality of their marriage. And now, it seemed like the distance between them had become insurmountable. She sat down on the edge of the bed, her mind spinning. What was it that David was searching for in the digital world? Was he searching for validation, excitement, or just an escape from the monotony of life? And more importantly, what was she searching for? Was it hope? A way back to the man she once loved? Or was it something deeper, a way to find herself again, outside of her role as wife and mother? Maggie didn't have all the answers yet, but she knew one thing: she couldn't keep living in the shadows of a marriage that had become more of a digital illusion than a real partnership. And as for David, he had a long road ahead of him if he truly wanted to fix what had been broken. But first, he had to face the truth of his own digital addiction, and whether it was truly worth it to him to give up the escape, and fight for what they once had. The days after that confrontation were some of the quietest Maggie had ever experienced in her marriage. It was a silence that felt heavy, like a thick fog that refused to lift. David had withdrawn into himself, leaving her to sort through the mess of emotions, doubts and pain that had taken root in her heart. Maggie wasn't sure if she was angry at David anymore, or at herself. She wasn't even sure if she was angry at all. She just felt lost. For the first time in years, Maggie didn't know who she was. The house felt empty in a way it hadn't before. It was as if all the love and life that had filled their home was drained out, leaving only the hollow echo of what used to be. She couldn't even recall the last time she had truly laughed. The last time she had felt truly alive. She spent her days distracted, going through the motions, and at night, she lay awake beside David, staring at the ceiling, wondering what had happened to them, and what would become of them. But as time passed, something within her began to shift. It started with small things. She spent more time alone, quietly reclaiming pieces of herself that she had long since lost. She signed up for a yoga class at a local studio. She'd always loved yoga, but it had been years since she'd made time for it. The instructor, a woman named Nora, was warm and welcoming, and the classes quickly became a sanctuary for Maggie. It wasn't just the physical practice, it was the way the space allowed her to breathe, to be present in her body, to clear her mind. It was a way of feeling again. She began taking long walks in the park, alone, with only her thoughts for company. The rhythm of her feet on the pavement became a meditation, and with each step, she felt herself letting go of the tension in her shoulders. There was something comforting about being alone in the quiet of nature. She'd forgotten what it felt like to just be. Slowly, she started to piece together her own sense of identity again. She hadn't realized how much she had buried herself in the role of wife and mother. Somewhere along the way, she had lost touch with who Maggie truly was, beyond the responsibilities of her family and marriage. She had spent so many years nurturing David, their children, and the home that she had forgotten to nurture herself. In a strange way, the pain of David's betrayal had become a catalyst for her own self-discovery. One afternoon, after an especially moving yoga class, Maggie met with her friend Rachel for coffee. Rachel had been a part of Maggie's life for years, but she hadn't been as close lately. They hadn't shared as many moments of vulnerability since the early days of their friendship, and Maggie had long ago tucked her own personal issues away, afraid of burdening anyone. But today, sitting across from Rachel in the cozy corner of their favorite coffee shop, Maggie found herself opening up in a way she hadn't expected. "I've been thinking a lot about myself lately," Maggie said, stirring her coffee absently. "About who I am. About who I've become in this marriage, in my life. And I don't know if I recognize myself anymore." Rachel raised an eyebrow, setting her cup down. "What do you mean?" Maggie paused, gathering her thoughts. She had never been good at putting her emotions into words, but something about Rachel's gentle presence made it feel safe. "I think I've been so wrapped up in being everything for David, for the kids, for the house, for everyone else, that I forgot about me. And now, I don't know how to find me again." Rachel gave her a soft, understanding smile. "I think you're already on the right path. Just by recognizing it, Maggie. That's huge." Maggie sighed, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. "I don't know where to go from here though. David's trying, but I'm not sure if I can ever trust him again. And even if I could, I'm not sure if I can go back to what we were. I don't know if I can just pick up where we left off." Rachel nodded. "You don't have to go back to what you were. You can go forward, Maggie. The woman you are now, the one who's rediscovering herself, she deserves just as much attention as the woman you were when you first got married. You deserve to have your own life, even within your marriage." Maggie's heart felt lighter as Rachel's words sank in. She had spent so long putting herself last that she had forgotten that her needs, her desires, mattered too. She wasn't just a wife, a mother, a caretaker. She was Maggie, a woman with her own dreams, her own identity, her own future. And maybe, just maybe, that future didn't have to be tied to David's actions, to his mistakes. Maybe she could find a way to move forward, with or without him, and be whole again. The next few days were a turning point for Maggie. She found herself less consumed by the thought of David's betrayal, less obsessed with wondering if they could fix things. Instead, she began to focus on herself. She continued her yoga practice, took up painting again, a hobby she had loved in college, and spent more time with friends. She even started planning a trip to visit her sister in New York, something she had always wanted to do but had never found the time for. For the first time in months, Maggie felt a flicker of hope, not about her marriage, but about her life. She realized that, regardless of what happened with David, she had the power to rebuild. She had the power to choose her own happiness, her own path. One evening, as she returned from a walk, Maggie found David sitting on the porch. He was holding a glass of wine, staring out into the yard, and the sight of him pulled at her heart. He looked like the man she had married, the man she had once adored. But something inside her had shifted. She wasn't the same woman anymore, and neither was he. David looked up as she approached, a tentative smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Hey," he said quietly. "Can we talk?" Maggie hesitated, then nodded, sitting down beside him. There was a calmness in her now that hadn't been there before. She was no longer consumed by anger, by resentment. She was simply here. "I've been thinking," David began, his voice soft. "I don't know what's going to happen with us, but I want you to know that I'm trying. I'm really trying. And I don't want to lose you, Maggie. I know I've hurt you, but I want to make it right." Maggie looked at him, her heart heavy but clear. She wasn't sure if she could forgive him completely. She wasn't sure what the future held for them. But in this moment, she realized something: she had to be okay, with or without him. "I'm not sure what's going to happen either, David," she said gently. "But I need you to understand that I need to do this for me. I need to find myself again. And if we're meant to be, we'll find our way back to each other. But I can't do that if I'm losing myself in the process." David nodded, his eyes filled with emotion. "I understand. I just want you to know that I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." And for the first time in a long while, Maggie didn't feel the weight of his promises dragging her down. She felt lighter, freer, as if, just maybe, she could begin again. The weeks following Maggie's personal transformation were filled with quiet moments of introspection and growing clarity. She wasn't completely sure where the road ahead would lead her, but for the first time in months, she felt a sense of peace within herself. She was reclaiming her identity, piece by piece, and it felt empowering. She continued her yoga practice, went on walks by herself, and even took a few solo weekend trips to explore nearby cities. She started reading books she had always meant to read, ones that weren't about marriage, kids, or the house. She started to feel alive again in a way she hadn't in years. Maggie had come to realize that, no matter what happened with David, she needed to prioritize her own happiness. But that didn't mean she had forgotten about her marriage. In the quiet of the evening, she still thought about David. She thought about their good times, their struggles, and the way things had spiraled in recent months. She often found herself wondering if the distance between them could be bridged, if they could somehow rebuild the life they had once shared. But the answer wasn't clear, and every time she came close to answering, she felt uncertain again. It was during one of their marriage counseling sessions that the shift Maggie had been waiting for finally began to take shape. That day, David had seemed more sincere than ever before. He arrived early to the session, sitting quietly in the waiting room. When Maggie walked in, she noticed that he was staring at his hands, deep in thought. He looked up at her, his expression softening as if to reassure her that he was truly there. But Maggie still wasn't sure if this was just another attempt to make her believe something that wasn't there. They were in the counselor's office, sitting across from each other, the air thick with the words neither of them had been able to say yet. The counselor, Dr. Wilson, was a patient woman, one who had been guiding them through their broken communication for weeks. But today, Maggie sensed that things were different. David broke the silence, his voice barely above a whisper. "Maggie, I'm not proud of what I did. I've spent so much time thinking about why I did it, and I don't have any excuses. I was selfish, and I hurt you. I didn't want to lose you, but I was too blind to see that I was already losing you by keeping things from you." Maggie's breath caught in her throat. His words, raw and unguarded, hit her harder than she expected. She had heard apologies from him before, but this time, there was something in his voice that felt different. It wasn't just an apology, it was an admission, a recognition of the depth of the damage he had caused. And for the first time in a long while, Maggie believed him. David continued, his eyes fixed on hers. "I can't undo the mistakes I made, Maggie. But I want to try. I don't want to be the person I was. I want to be the man you deserve. I know it's going to take time, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes. And if you're willing to try, then we can do this together." Maggie felt a mix of emotions stir within her. She wasn't sure if it was enough, if his words could heal the wounds he had caused, or if the journey back to trust was even possible. But for the first time in their sessions, Maggie found herself listening without the wall of doubt and bitterness she'd been carrying for so long. "I don't know if I can forgive you, David," Maggie said, her voice soft but firm. "I don't know if I can forget what you did. But I'm not sure we're supposed to just pick up where we left off. We can't just go back to what we were. We need to rebuild, but not from the same foundation. We need to build something new, something stronger." David nodded slowly, understanding her hesitation. "I'm willing to do that. I'm willing to start fresh, no matter how long it takes." Maggie took a deep breath. She was scared, scared of what it would mean to let him back in fully, scared of the possibility of being hurt again. But she also knew that she couldn't heal if she stayed in the past. For her own sake, she needed to move forward, whether it was with David or without him. "I'm willing to try," she finally said, her voice shaky but resolute. "But we have to be different. We both do. If we're going to move forward, it can't be the way it was before." David smiled softly, relief flooding his face. "I understand. I'll do whatever it takes, Maggie. We'll go at your pace. I just want you to know that I'm committed to this, to you." Dr. Wilson, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke. "This is a big step, both of you. Rebuilding takes time, and it's not a straight line. There will be setbacks, but if you're both committed, you can rebuild a new kind of relationship. But you have to be patient with each other, and with yourselves." Maggie nodded. She wasn't sure what the future held, but at that moment, she felt a spark of something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. It was fragile, but it was there. A glimmer of possibility that maybe, just maybe, they could rebuild not just their marriage, but themselves. The next few weeks were filled with hard work. Therapy sessions continued, and David made more of an effort than ever before to show Maggie that he was willing to do the work. But it wasn't just about therapy anymore. They started to have deeper conversations that weren't just about the past, but about what they wanted for the future. They took walks together in silence, letting the natural world surround them, and talked more than they had in years. Maggie's own transformation didn't stop with just her self-reflection. As she and David worked to rebuild their connection, she found herself wanting to live again, in every sense of the word. She reconnected with friends, and for the first time in years, she began to dream about her own future, separate from her role as a wife or mother. One evening, after a quiet dinner, Maggie went to her bedroom to change into comfortable clothes. As she stood in front of the mirror, she caught sight of herself. The woman looking back at her was different than the one who had been so lost and disconnected only a few months ago. She had found something within herself, something she hadn't realized was missing until now. She wasn't just someone's wife. She was Maggie. And that mattered too. David walked into the room, standing behind her in the doorway. He looked at her with tenderness in his eyes, and Maggie felt her heart flutter, not with the fear she had once carried, but with the warmth of something new, something that had grown between them. "I'm proud of you," David said softly, his voice sincere. "You're stronger than I ever realized." Maggie turned to face him, a small but genuine smile on her lips. "We both are," she said, her voice filled with quiet strength. Time had a strange way of shaping people. It either bent them toward bitterness or led them toward healing, and Maggie wasn't sure which path she would take. What she did know was that she could no longer live in the limbo of uncertainty, trapped between her old self and the woman she was becoming. She had to make a choice, not just for David, not just for their marriage, but for herself. The process of forgiveness was not as easy as it sounded in self-help books or as it was promised in therapy. It was messy. It wasn't a straight path. Some days, Maggie thought she was getting there, to that place where she could let go of the resentment and truly move forward. Other days, the anger came rushing back, an unexpected wave that threatened to drown her in its force. She didn't know how to make the anger go away, or if she even could. But she was trying. That's all she could do. David was trying too. After their heart-to-heart in the counselor's office, there had been no more pretending. No more sweeping things under the rug. David had become more present, more aware of Maggie's emotional needs. He didn't just apologize anymore, he listened. He noticed when she was upset, when she needed space, when she needed comfort. He started to pick up the small pieces he had ignored for so long, the ones that held their relationship together, the everyday moments that seemed small but were crucial. But Maggie couldn't deny the part of her that still felt hurt. She still carried the weight of his betrayal with her, like a scar on her soul. And the more she tried to forgive him, the more she realized that forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. It meant learning to live with the scar, to acknowledge the pain without letting it define who she was. She spent nights lying awake, thinking about everything David had done and everything he was trying to do now. He was trying so hard to make it right, but Maggie knew that his actions alone couldn't erase the past. It wasn't about fixing what had been broken, but about learning how to move forward with the cracks still visible. One evening, after a particularly emotional therapy session, Maggie came home to find David sitting in the living room, holding a box. His face was pale, and his hands were trembling slightly. Maggie stood in the doorway, her heart racing. "What's this?" she asked, her voice hesitant. David stood up and walked toward her, the box in his hands. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about how we can't just go back to what we were." "You're right. We can't. But I want to try to make things right. I know I can't change the past, but I can show you that I'm committed to our future." Maggie frowned, a mix of confusion and curiosity tugging at her. "David, what are you talking about?" He took a deep breath and opened the box, revealing a small collection of mementos, photographs, notes, and a few trinkets from their years together. Each item was tied to a moment in their relationship. There was a picture from their wedding day, a note from their first anniversary, a tiny seashell from a trip to the beach where they had spent hours walking and talking. "I've kept these," David said softly. "I've kept them all these years. They're the moments that remind me of who we were, and who I want us to be again. I know that what I did is unforgivable in some ways, but I'm asking for the chance to show you that I'm here, that I'm not going anywhere. I want us to create new memories, new moments, but I know it starts with acknowledging the past." Maggie felt a lump form in her throat as she looked at the items in the box. They were more than just souvenirs from their past, they were symbols of the life they had once shared. She didn't know if she could ever return to that life, but the sincerity in David's eyes made her realize something important. Healing didn't mean going back. It meant moving forward, no matter how painful it was. She sat down beside him, her hand trembling as she reached out and took the picture from their wedding day. It felt surreal to hold it, a reminder of the love they had once shared. It was like holding on to a different version of herself, a version before the hurt, before the betrayal. "You don't have to prove anything to me, David," Maggie said, her voice quiet but firm. "I see that you're trying. And that matters. But forgiveness, it's not something I can just give. It's something I have to work through, just like you've worked through your own issues." David nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. "I understand. I know it's going to take time. I'm not asking you to forgive me overnight. But I'm here, Maggie. I'll be here, every step of the way." Maggie took a deep breath, the weight of her emotions pressing against her chest. She didn't have all the answers, but in this moment, she realized that forgiveness wasn't a destination, it was a journey. And maybe, just maybe, it was a journey she could take with David, as long as they were both committed to the work it would require. "I'm not sure what this looks like, David," Maggie said softly, her voice full of vulnerability. "But I'm willing to try. Not for you, not for us, but for me. I have to find my own peace, my own way forward." David's eyes softened, and he reached out to take her hand. "I'm right here, Maggie. And no matter what, I'll be with you every step of the way." In that moment, Maggie felt a sense of relief wash over her, not because everything was fixed, not because she had all the answers, but because she was finally choosing to move forward. She wasn't waiting for the past to heal her. She was healing herself, in her own time, on her own terms. Maggie's journey toward forgiveness had just begun, but she had taken the first crucial step, not toward forgetting what had happened, but toward acknowledging it and allowing herself the space to heal. In this chapter, Maggie begins to truly understand that healing isn't a one-time decision, but a series of small steps that require both patience and vulnerability. And though the road ahead was still uncertain, Maggie knew that the journey was one she would walk on her own terms. Maggie stood at the window, looking out at the early morning light filtering through the trees. The world seemed different now, quieter somehow, as if the chaos and confusion of the past year had finally begun to settle into something more manageable. She could see the morning dew on the grass, hear the distant hum of the neighborhood waking up, and she felt at peace. It wasn't the kind of peace that came with everything being perfect. It was the kind of peace that came with accepting imperfection, with understanding that the journey to healing was a long one, but that every step forward was worth it. Over the past few months, Maggie had made a promise to herself. She would no longer live in the shadows of the woman she used to be. She wasn't going to pretend that everything was fine just because it was easier to do so. But she also wasn't going to let the pain of the past dictate her future. She had learned that forgiveness wasn't a moment of absolution, it was a process, a journey of letting go and choosing to move forward, whether alone or together. David had given her the space she needed. He had respected her pace, never pushing her to forgive him but instead showing her with every action that he was committed to making things right. They had made progress, yes. But the truth was, their relationship would never be the same. It couldn't be. Not because they couldn't rebuild, but because they had both grown in different ways. Maggie had rediscovered herself, and David had, too. They were different people now, but they were still there for each other, still choosing to navigate life together. It wasn't about picking up where they had left off, it was about creating something new, a stronger, more honest foundation. Maggie had learned to forgive, not just David, but herself as well. She had spent years believing that her worth was tied to her role as a wife, as a mother, as the perfect woman in her marriage. She had believed that if she did everything right, if she kept everything in place, then everything would be okay. But she had learned that nothing in life was perfect, and that trying to control everything only left her feeling hollow. David's betrayal had been the catalyst for her growth, but it hadn't been the defining moment of her life. It had opened her eyes to her own strength, her own worth. She had learned to live for herself again, to find her own happiness, whether or not it came from her marriage. And now, she was learning to embrace the future, uncertain as it was. It had been a year since the day David had confessed his emotional affair. A year filled with therapy, difficult conversations, and moments of doubt. A year of rediscovery and healing. Maggie wasn't sure what the future would bring, but she had stopped waiting for everything to be fixed. She had learned to live in the present, to appreciate the small, quiet moments of connection with David, with herself, with her children. David walked into the room, his eyes warm as he joined her at the window. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, his voice low, as though afraid to break the stillness of the moment. Maggie turned to him, offering a smile that was soft but genuine. She reached for his hand, feeling the warmth of his touch. He wasn't perfect, and neither was she. But they were here together, working toward something new. She had learned to forgive him, but more importantly, she had learned to forgive herself. And in that forgiveness, she had found a sense of peace. "I was thinking about how far we've come," Maggie said, her voice calm. "About how much we've both grown. About how we're not the same people we were when all of this started, but we're still here. We're still trying." David squeezed her hand, his eyes filled with gratitude. "I'll always be here, Maggie. I've learned so much from this. And I'll spend the rest of my life showing you how much you mean to me." Maggie looked out the window again, a sense of quiet confidence settling within her. There was no certainty in life. There was no guarantee that things would always go as planned. But she had learned that the most important thing was to keep moving forward, to keep choosing to live fully, despite the pain and the uncertainty. She turned back to David, meeting his gaze with a sense of quiet strength. "I'm not sure what the future holds for us, David," she said, her voice steady. "But I know that we're both willing to keep trying. And that's enough." David smiled, his hand resting gently on her cheek. "It's more than enough." And in that moment, Maggie felt something shift within her, a deep sense of acceptance, of peace. She didn't need to know what the future held. She only needed to know that she was strong enough to face whatever came her way. She had learned to forgive. She had learned to grow. And that was enough. Together, they stood by the window, watching as the day began. Whatever came next, Maggie knew she was ready.